Welcome back to Left Anchor. I'm Alexei the Greek.
And I'm Ryan Cooper. So, today we're taking a trip down memory lane. We are reading an old Jacobin article as well as a book that was turned into a book. The book / article is called Four Futures. But I guess the book has a subtitle. Can't forget the subtitle. I always get the subtitle right. Life After Capitalism. That's nice and short. I like that.
Yeah, a nice little tidy book. I teach this one, and I was just thinking how well it's aged because it was published in 2016. I assume before Trump won in 2016, it was published.
Certainly written before that. Yeah.
Well before. And as we'll get into, boy, it's about the future, and the future has started to arrive. So it's fairly prescient and interesting to see where we're at now and look back and revisit it, I think.
Yeah. By the way, it's by Peter Frase, who's one of the OG editors of Jacobin. I'm not sure what he's up to these days, but yeah, it was funny reading this thing. It really took me back, to when, I was living in DC, going to the Jacobin reading groups.
Oh, yeah.
And Jacobin seemed that was where we met, if I'm not mistaken, right? That was like 2013.
In person.
Yeah.
And that's where we met in person. We knew each other from the Twitters before that, but that's where we met in person. I want to say it was like the first DC Jacobin reading group was like January 2013, maybe something like that.
Yeah.
But we had met the previous winter somehow.
Yeah, you came down and we had some beers and then we went to this reading group with a bunch of dusty ass socialists in a little room. In a library, always in a library. Bjorn was there. If you know Bjorn,
the man, the myth, the legend. You mean?
Yeah. But
Rob. There was a Rob.
Rob. Yeah. It was my first interaction with sort of ultra leftism.
Of course, the man, the myth, the legend who ran the show, Dave Kibe, our buddy Dave Kibe.
The actual organizer, legitimately kind of important figure in the American left over the last decade.
That's right.
Seeded innumerable other, types of in-person interactions, which I think is, really quite impressive these days.
He's like a Clark Kent Superman type who literally, it's like, how do you have time for all this political educating you do without compensation? You do all this great work. And you have a full-time job, kind of like how we do a podcast and have a full-time job separately. But he does way more than a podcast levels of work.
Yeah. Somewhat less impressive to do a podcast, I think. Well, it's just so much of a pain in the ass to organize an actual event.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Those are the days that we were not thinking about fascism nearly as much. We were thinking about possibilities for how the left could radicalize, the libs more generally. I remember, is this around the time you came out with a series of pieces about the different factions of the Democratic Party, where you had like the Brandeisians, the neoliberals, the Social Democrats, and the Democratic Socialists? I thought that was a really neat series where you kind of like showed in a real beautiful blend of concrete policy and also political theory terms, the distinctions and why they matter.
Yeah, that was after 2016.
Was it once Bernie had already been kind of?
Yeah. But there was that time, I guess what I'm most nostalgic for was like from, 2013 to 2015, when it was like socialism was this sort of like we were discovering all of these ancient truths. We were excavating the sarcophagus and we were finding all of the ancient wisdoms. And it was before Trump. It was like, when
Twitter was actually good back then, that's, we made some good friends, had some great discussions, even had debates with people across the aisle that it sounds ridiculous now.
Yeah. No, right. I mean, maybe it was ridiculous, but I don't think it was. You used to have conversations with conservatives before Trump. And like in 2012, when
some of them,
when Romney got rinsed and the party was like, Jesus, we got to do something about this immigration stuff. We're getting killed here. And it was, it probably did not lead to any sort of concrete policy, change on the right in those days. I mean, maybe a little bit, the Republicans did, they came up with this plan to basically try to take immigration off the table through a reform policy and like sort of stem the bleeding as they saw it in those terms back in those days. It did not pass because of opposition from hardliners. And lo and behold, they didn't realize that they could move drastically to the right on immigration and win a much larger percentage of the Latino vote. But, I just think that like the very fact of just sort of encountering the political opposition in dialogue where both sides attempt to, converse in good faith and like actually engage in debate, like Stephen Douglas and Abraham Lincoln, that was healthy for a democratic society. That was real sort of like basic tenets of having a democratic republic, and it does not exist anymore. And I think that's really not great.
Yeah, it was about your priors and your values and your assumptions and your use of evidence, and ideology, of course, was prominent, but it was like there was like the Ezra Klein liberals and then the right-wing version of that. And they were both very wrong, but they were actually engaging in discussion and argument.
Yeah.
As opposed to whatever is going on now.
Not just abject lies, and saying up is down and
gaslighting and just hate speech.
Appointing drunken rapists to every cabinet department. And, it's just inarguably much worse. Anyway, we should probably stop reminiscing and get to the article. As much as we would want to wind the clock
Damn it,
back.
man! It's a book. I know it was an article, but it's a book now, and it's literally bound. Give it some respect. It's a paperback. It's very small, but it's nice.
It's true. Quite cute. Short.
It's adorable.
Yeah. So,
but punchy.
Yeah. Well, you see, it was like an article that was worked up from, like 6,000 words to 20,000 words.
In the film industry, it's what they call high concept. It's like a high concept film. It's like Die Hard in an elevator or something. I guess Die Hard included elevators. That's not a good use of that thing.
Yeah.
But high concept, academic political theory, I'd say. You have these ideal types. And if I may, you tell me if this is a good way to articulate the kind of premise of it.
Sure.
So the two chief concerns that Frase had, which I think over the years have proved to be more legitimate than at the time I would have foreseen. Obviously, ecological crisis was clear back then, and it's gotten even more depressingly problematic now. So climate change, ecological crisis is one. And then he wrote about automation and the fear, if ecological crisis is about the fear of scarcity, and the way that climate change destroys the conditions for life and destroys habitats and makes natural resources more scarce, then automation is a kind of contradictory fear, a certain kind of overproduction that makes the labor force less necessary and takes away the possibility for wage labor to have the place that it has now, which poses a different kind of crisis. And the variable that he chooses to hold constant is automation and the advance of technology. And he says, with that held constant, there are basically two variables at play here. One is the class struggle and class power, and the other is how bad climate change gets, like how well we're able to deal with climate change, right? So the class power struggle and the struggle against the crisis of climate change.
Yeah.
And depending on how that turns out, there's four different futures.
Yeah. You got your classic 2x2 matrix. And he ties it into climate change, but it's like scarcity versus abundance. So like, do we live in a world of practically limitless resources and energy above all? Or do we live in a world where there is, still like it still must be rationed in some way, whether it's by price or by planning or whatever. Yeah. And that,
but I think the abundance is baked in a certain sense, because even in the worst outcome, exterminism, the elite still have abundance, right? Because of technology.
Right. They have abundance for themselves, but it's not enough for everyone. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's not as if there's an absolute shortage. It's just that, well, and we'll get to this there, where it's like, well, there could be enough for everyone, but the people with the power don't want to share, and so let's kill everyone else.
So that's why it's like abundance scarcity is one axis and hierarchy or equality is the other.
Yeah, exactly. It is amusing to note that the abundance, word has become, a huge. We may get to that actually a little bit later. There's an article that came out today by the financial analyst economist Dan Davies in this arena. But let's go. Yeah, we can go through the four futures. You sort of set up your 2x2 matrix, and that gives you four boxes. And you've got communism, rentism, socialism, and exterminism, which we've already mentioned. Communism is not like historical communism. Ironically, it's like the as envisioned by Marx in his sort of vague and very non-specific comments about what the far future of socialism might look like. That's egalitarianism and abundance. So you have limitless resources practically, and they are shared equally. So you basically can have as much as you want. You can do whatever you want. There's no, restrictions on, your consumption or anything like that. That
Star Trek-y.
Yeah. And right. That's another thing I like about this book, that it's very poppy. It like references science fiction and popular media a lot, because science fiction is a very relevant reference point. There are just a lot of great works that have basically investigated these type of ideas.
It's important to anticipate if the world changes in certain ways, what ways of being are we going to choose in response? Because there are options, right?
Yeah. And I think Frase makes a good point that, even if you have a communist utopia, this would be like paradise. It would not mean the end of politics necessarily. It would not mean the end of competition. He references
conflict, hierarchy.
Well, there would be hierarchy, not politically, but there would be hierarchy in the sense of status. Yeah. He references the Cory Doctorow book, Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom, where people compete to earn like these things, the Wi-Fi points. It's like Instagram likes, more or less. And yeah, so you would still have this type of just human political behavior, but it would be, a pretty nice place to live.
Right. The conflict, because we do have conflicts today that don't have to do necessarily with wealth and power, but the consequence of the conflicts in a place where wealth and power are not, where there's no inequality in that sense, the consequence of a different status is quite different, right? It doesn't have the same kind of punch, if you will.
Yeah, you don't die. You can't starve, because you could just go to the replicator and just have, give me limitless food. Just keep hitting the button. And let's see, second future, rentism. This is hierarchy plus abundance. So you have the Star Trek replicator, but you still have the some kind of political power structure in which the replicator technology is controlled by a small elite. And he talks about intellectual property law as an example of how that might work. So you have still private profit in the form of people who own like the replicator patterns, the copyrights on that sort of thing, so that you can't get your, McChicken unless you buy a license.
Pay for the license. And this is why it's rentism, right? This is where there's no more capital accumulation. It's just the extraction of rents by those who own the intellectual property. And just like landowners own the physical property and they extract rents, here this is, to me, this is where the super prescient in a bad way vision comes through. Look what's happening. This is why you have techno-feudalism written by Varoufakis. This is why Jody Dean wrote a book on something called, something similar to techno-feudalism, I think, as a concept. This idea that maybe we're already post-capitalism. And if you look at Google and Amazon and, the ways they make money is they are just collecting data and they're charging fees, Apple charging fees to use the App Store. They're just kind of extracting rents from other businesses, from consumers. He even mentions Silicon Valley and the idea that the rent extraction comes from having the rights to certain patterns, to algorithms, to what we would call now AI. Very, very much seems like a problem that we might run into, because, it doesn't have to be a place where people have to pay for things, but law and the force of the state can make it so through the private property that they protect for the elites, right?
Yeah. And another prescient thing I think that Frase points out is that in this future, which I think is part of where the Silicon Valley, sort of techno-feudalists are aiming at, but not all of them, and we'll get to that, is this rentism future. But that raises the question of, how does everyone pay for all this shit?
That's right.
If if there's no more need for work, and so you can't get a wage by going to a job, how are you going to afford your McChicken at the McReplicator? And so there's a number of possibilities there. You could have sort of fake make work jobs just to like force people to do something, dig a ditch and fill it back up again. You could have a universal basic income. You have heard that sort of thing from Silicon Valley people on occasion, though less so recently. And, you could have like profligate servant labor. You could like return to 19th century England, where everyone, gets it's like you don't.
But again, what one wonders why you want that when you have theoretically these robot servants. Maybe you want the niche service of a human or something.
Yeah, you don't want it because it's useful, strictly speaking. Maybe
there'd be restaurants with like a throwback to the olden days when humans were your servers. And it's like, that's a niche thing now.
Well, you could have the robot clean your bathroom, but it's much more satisfying.
More power over a human, right?
Yeah, it's not fun to push around a robot because they don't suffer. And so, I guess maybe they would.
It's kind of like a sadistic economy. Plus, he said there'll be a lot of lawsuits because of the IP thing. So there's a lot of lawyers, right? There'll be a lot of marketers, he says, because it's really important to
advertising. Make sure that your McChicken at the McReplicator. You're not getting Jeff's McChicken.
That's right. And cops, a lot of cops and military to protect, of course, the rich.
Yeah. So you can imagine like a whole panoply of jobs out there, fake or otherwise, and some sort of welfare state type stuff that would just like give enough income, distribute the profits back into the population such that they can afford the basics.
He does seem to think that a UBI would still be necessary. And that seems to be like a through line in all the futures, maybe. Is a UBI seems like it's going to be part of the future. And maybe that could be good in the sense that for rentism, it could move things in the direction of socialism or communism.
Yeah, well, you could say, you just like, okay, well, if we just keep on our current legal trajectory, eventually enough of the patents will expire so that, you'll be in rentism, but then eventually you'll just be able to have your own, you just get your McReplicator. And then from then you get all the public domain patterns, and that's it. You don't need to pay anymore. Obviously the forces of entrenched power would do all they can, but that's not necessarily a foregone conclusion. Especially when you could imagine people just like writing up patterns and giving them away for free. Like that's a thing that certainly I think people would try to do in such a situation. Obviously, that's very far away from happening.
Oh, by the way, I should say that it would go to communism because those were the two where abundance was the assumption, right? Where the ideal types where we don't have.
You'd move from rentism to communism, right? I meant to say that. Our third form is socialism, which, is kind of referencing like the Soviet model of socialism. And that's egalitarianism plus scarcity. And so you don't have the replicator. You do have a scarcity of resources. And so you do have to have some sort of, commanding system that will allocate resources. Not everybody can have everything they want. And so those decisions have to be made. But under a socialist system, they're made democratically, and they're made on an equal basis so that nobody is left out. Everybody has enough and nobody has too much. And that is not how Soviet communism worked. Whatever you want to say. But
another big difference from Soviet communism is he supports in this a vision of market socialism, really, where because you have equality, the market could be a technology that's useful for allocating equal rations or whatever. You know, and he talks about how you could like socialize Uber, and there's a lot of ways that standard of living with the UBI again, standard of living would still be high, but because of equality, it wouldn't be the replicator Star Trek scenario, but it would still be flourishing, I think, for everyone in a way that's more cognizant of limits.
I think I've referenced this study before, but there was this network of food banks, and I forget where it was, but basically they were trying to do Soviet style communism at the start, you know, so they had their like supply of food, and they were trying to predict, they were trying to go to every single different food bank from their whole big network and say, okay, what do you need? What do you need? What do you need? And try to plan directly what stuff that is best suited to your community. To
allocate based on.
It was a huge fucking pain in the ass and led to a ton of waste. And they're like, well, how about this? We'll set up a market, but not with money. We're just going to give you a coupon. All the food banks get the same number of coupons, and then you get to bid on the items that we have, you know, in the central depository. And this was very much more efficient and led to a much cleaner and less wasteful system.
And the key is you can't sell your coupons. You can't trade. No. Like there's no way that you can aggregate more coupons than anyone else. That's really important.
It was just a market as a technology. It's like, here's your script that's useful only for this particular context. And we're going to use it to just like try to distribute these things that we have in the most logical fashion. And it worked great. It was really... Because
then that technology identifies, you know, what's more needed, right? What's more, and it's just it's smarter in that sense than central planning.
In that specific context, it was a highly efficient information processing system. They achieved the exact same result that they wanted to achieve with trying to directly say, okay, this bundle of flour is going here, this bundle of flour is going there. You don't need to bother with that. But, you know, you have to remember that you can't just let, you know, quote unquote, let the market go by itself. That's
and you know, if you think of the advances that we're making now in AI and such, if everyone, the people, own the technology and the demos is actually in charge of both market technologies and other technologies, I think scarcity is less of an issue. You can deal with it pretty well, right? Because of all the smart ways that you can figure out how to, you know, help everyone out. Like win-wins are highly possible. And then there's plenty of solutions out there for all kinds of things. So,
yeah. I mean, the problem with markets is you have criminals and inequality. And so you need people to stop people from ripping each other off, from saying like, I promise to pay you this and then don't pay them or whatever. And I think more importantly in our modern context is that just some people can bring 10, 15, 100 million times the amount of resources to the market than the other person. And so in the traditional market fashion where you're rationing things by price and one person has $10 and one person has $100 billion, well, that's going to be a completely fucked system. But if
and you can make fake scarcity and you can really control all kinds of the variables and
if you even things out and you have a competent regulator, you know, markets are, with some exception, a useful technology. You know, you don't use them in a crisis situation where you could get price gouging, you know, like during wartime or something like that. But yeah, it's just a tool in the toolbox, and you use it if it makes sense and if it gets the outcomes that you want. Sometimes, you know, direct provision makes more sense. Sometimes, you can just have good old prices and competition. Our fourth future, exterminism. Here we have hierarchy plus scarcity. And this is the other one that I referenced before that I think an increasing number of Silicon Valley elites are heading towards. And I think this explains.
He mentions Silicon Valley in here back in 2016. He also mentioned Gaza.
Yeah. Boy, that was prescient. And that kind of is the object, lesson, an actual practical example of exactly what he's talking about right now. Exterminism, hierarchy plus scarcity. So you don't have enough resources to go around, but they're not distributed equally either. And so you have, in this post-work future, no need for the working class. They're completely superfluous.
They're disposable.
It's not necessary to keep them alive. And that is going to inevitably trend towards, well, let's just let them die or kill them. And frankly, Gaza is that
model.
More or less global. What has happened. You think about South African apartheid. One of the big reasons why apartheid ended was that the whole South African economy depended on the black working class. That was how they made all their money, and that made them dependent on, striking some sort of a deal when things came to a crisis with Nelson Mandela. And that used to be somewhat true from what I understand with Palestinians in Gaza. It used to be very common for Gazans to, even, like post 67 and whatnot, they would come into Israel, they would work as laborers, construction workers, house cleaners, domestic servants, that sort of thing, and come back. And that's just really not the case anymore. And there was just this population of people who they're just a nuisance. And the plan, Netanyahu said today that he agrees with Trump's idea that we've just got to get rid of these people, that they've got to go somewhere else. And
eerily, the chapter on exterminism talks about how, it mentions that the groundwork was laid with Obama and the assassination program and the drones and the kind of, even back then, I remember how the assassination program wasn't even identifying people. It was identifying unidentified people who followed a certain pattern. Like they went to this cafe and which is known to be a cafe that quote unquote terrorists go to, and
signature strikes.
Yeah. And so there were signature strikes. And now, of course, in Gaza, we have AI assassinations, right? And AI driven, like algorithmic killing.
Yeah.
So he mentions things like RoboCop. He mentions Gaza, Silicon Valley, algorithms, mass incarceration, assassination programs. And between the rentism chapter and this chapter, these are the when I look at reality today, these are kind of the things that I see in prominence. I don't know.
Yeah, Gaza is not that large of a, portion of the, global human population, but that is certainly a warning sign.
It's boomerang back home, hasn't it, though, with the kidnappings and the El Salvadorian torture prison, right? It's been a pretext to kind of, if you genocide and ethnically cleanse these people that aren't considered human, and then suddenly people that support those people, you also say, I don't know if they're citizens, but if they are, they're not really citizens. And actually, I'm going to determine whether or not they deserve due process or whether or not they should be sent to a torture prison. It doesn't take a lot of imagination to see how that logic, that's the imperial logic returning home to roost,
Oh yeah, for sure. This is Spencer Ackerman's book. I forget the title.
Reign of Terror.
Reign of Terror. Yeah. Yeah, your classic imperial war coming home, all of the surveillance shit being turned on the domestic population. But, I guess this raises the question, of how we stand. So we're 14 years on from the original article, almost 10 years from the book. of how plausible this, how far along we are on the track to these various four futures, which I do think are fairly plausible potential end states for, capitalism over the next, like, say, 100, 200 years, maybe. And so I'll
tell you what surprises me. What surprises me is not the climate change, which I knew would get worse and worse. And I was not super optimistic about how that would progress. And sure enough, we've not been doing nearly enough. And that's not trending in the right direction. The thing that I was a little iffy on was the automation prediction. But now with what we've seen just recently in how quickly robotics, AI, and not just language models, but like all kinds of, it seems like every week there's these leaps, and you could just imagine that if this pace keeps up, there might be some crazy changes, transformative changes because of those advancements. Right?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about climate a little bit and energy in general. So in 2024, solar and wind renewables in general were 90% of new power installations worldwide. And the vast majority of that, like 2/3 of it, that was in China. And that matters. I mean, frankly, America is a bit player in climate these days. We're about 15% of global emissions. China emits 60% more than the US and the EU put together.
Isn't it true that for the first time China's emissions stopped increasing, something like that, like the curve, like it flatlined,
it's the first time that they've decreased without a recession hitting, if I understand correctly. But from what I've been reading about the China analysts, the consensus seems to be that they've peaked. If they haven't peaked now, they're going to peak soon, and it's going to start. The emissions are going to start falling quick.
Interesting, because of all that built up green energy.
Yeah, well, so the massive build out of green energy, massive rollout of EVs, all transportation tech. They've got a huge, a rail network that it's like starting in 2008 to 2022, they built like 19,000 miles of high speed rail. In the time that we built a high speed rail that goes from like Los Angeles to Bakersfield.
We're like Neanderthals in comparison when it comes to that kind of stuff. It's just crazy.
It is like America in the 1930s, except like 5 times bigger. And so like in 4 years, I think the Chinese share of EVs, of new cars, has gone from like 10% to over 50%. And there's every reason to think that that's going to, they're just going to clock out the entire internal combustion market over the next decade or so. So emissions are looking, so it's not fast enough. We should have been doing this 10 years, 20 years, 30 years ago. But there's major progress being made in the places where it matters, which is China and Europe,
where they have the most people.
Right? Even in the United States, even Trump can't stop the rise of solar and wind and batteries because they're cheaper than anything else.
Yeah, right.
So that part I'm fairly optimistic about. The actual climate change seems to be. I was just reading a paper today that the rise in temperature in 2024 is way faster than the normal climate models would predict. I guess James Hansen, who's one of the Cassandra scientists of climate change, thinks it's because of declining cloud cover. And so that part of it could be...
Well, that's the thing, right? Even part of the argument long ago was, I don't care if you get your act together later on. It would be too late. It's like irreversible at that point. But that was some of the worry was that, like, I don't care if you pull a 180 and do just like miraculous things later on. Although there are some technological advancements, apparently, like, predicted by Kim Stanley Robinson's book. What was it? Ministry of the Future.
Yeah, Ministry for the Future. Yeah. I think that what'll happen is, so the renewable energy technology revolution is going to happen. Like, it's just unstoppable, just in terms of market dynamics. It's just a question of when, not if. It's not happening nearly fast enough. Climate change is already really bad, and it may get much, much worse very quickly over the next like 10 to 20 years. And I think what's going to happen is countries are going to start going for geoengineering. They're going to try to reduce temperatures with injecting sulfate aerosols into the stratosphere, or, similar. It's like apparently blasting seawater into the air can help. I mean, that's a kind of terrifying idea, because if you do that too much, you could touch off an ice age.
That's right. Yes, it's got like Atlantis vibes,
Yeah, but it's not possible to stop. You just need a couple tens of billions of dollars a year, maybe. I mean, you're just sending some planes or some balloons up in the atmosphere. And so I think that the ecological devastation is going to be quite terrible, but it's not going to be the worst kind of climate future that you could imagine, where the Earth just gets like cooked, and global
where
temperature.
There's no natural resources and there's no habitable zones or anything like that. Yeah.
You're going to have a major mass extinction, huge die-off, but it's not going to make the world uninhabitable.
So do you think then that rentism and communism are the two more likely options in terms of the future?
Well, see, I'm not so sure about that. And this is maybe, where we turn to like the AI question, because do we see a future where labor is like totally superfluous? Like, we're not anywhere near like replicator technology. That's total science fiction stuff at this point. Nobody's even trying to work on something like that. Like the whole idea is not even on the drawing board anywhere. We do have AI, which is, it's kind of a
forget the replicator for a second. If robotics evolves in the way that AI is evolving, and you can have robots doing the agricultural work, robots making all of the products, robots doing all of the care work and the service work, like that is, to me, that's different than a replicator. In terms of the imagination, I can't imagine that.
Yeah. And
you know what I mean? Like in the Amazon warehouse, it's robots that are doing the drudge work and doing we have the driving cars kind of already,
Yeah, and so I guess on the question of robots, you look at on the current trajectory, I guess I would say that most robotic stuff are labor enhancing rather than labor replacing.
Right.
If you're
for sure,
you look at these companies like Waymo, that have, by all accounts, mostly functional self-driving cars. They still have a large human component in the back end. They need people to pull them out of situations where they get stuck in a parking lot or something like that. They're programmed to be very conservative, so they get in a situation where they don't know what's going on. In quotes. Then they have this like big, it's just similar to how in a steel foundry like 150 years ago you had 500 guys, and now you have a bunch of a bunch of robots, but there's still 10 guys who are there to oversee everything. Fewer humans are needed, but the humans use the machines in order to have greater productivity than they had even with greater humans alone, right? Yeah. And that's nothing new, really. That I think would not be super disruptive. And, robot servants, I would be highly hesitant to put my son into the arms of a robot. I think that's
apparently there's all kinds. I mean, maybe it's a generational thing. Apparently there's data that people in college right now would rather be graded by ChatGPT than their professors.
Yeah, they would.
And the reason, interestingly enough,
they use ChatGPT to write their essays.
Well, that too, but they think that the AI will be more fair than their professors. And one of the reasons they gave is not just because of bias for random reasons, but like a student apparently heard a professor talking about how they were grading until 2 a.m. And the student was thinking, well, was my paper graded at 7 p.m. or at 1:30 a.m.? Right. And you can see a kind of logic why you'd rather trust that. So, things might shift in terms of people's preferences for that kind of thing.
Yeah. But I guess that raises the question of AI and how well it can serve as an actually intelligent, purpose. So AI, there's a huge galaxy of different, software models and so on, large language models. You have AI systems that are used for images. There's AI that scientists use for,
right. Medicine. We haven't talked about discoveries in medicine or science, energy. I think maybe the most good could happen in terms of medicine, science, energy, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, you use these AI models, which can, just ingest a shit ton of data and, draw conclusions that people can't, they just can't fit all that shit in their heads at once. Right.
And that's not even talking about quantum computing, which is another new thing, right?
Yeah. But all of those instances, I think, again, are labor enhancing rather than labor replacing. You don't have an actually, intelligent, conscious entity that can actually think. You have a thing that can produce quite shocking insights sometimes, but in order for that to be verified, you have to have an expert looking over its shoulder to be able to tell.
I don't know. Apparently what's coming is something called agentic AI, because now it waits for you to ask a question or direct it. But apparently what's coming soon is it's active. It doesn't wait for you. It comes to you, and it's an agent.
It comes to you whether you want it or not. It's knocking at your door.
It's scary. That's where we get some
it's rubbing your wife's feet right now. And that's
but the other point I want to make, though, is you're definitely right that it will enhance the capacity of humans in many ways to be more productive and to do all kinds of cool things, and that humans are necessary. But remember when grocery stores stopped having people bag your groceries and ring you up, and instead you had to do it yourself? It was this is not a superior method. This is more work for me, the consumer. This is less efficient. This is enshittification, as Cory Doctorow writes about, right? This is worse. And so, capital, as long as capital's in charge, it's not just going to replace humans when it's better for the consumer. It's going to do it when it's just more profitable, and that might make things worse in some ways, right?
Yeah, that is. Yeah, I'm reminded of the Patton Oswalt bit where he's the grocery store got all my letters that I want to be a checkout clerk.
Talk about free riding.
I will say, I go with my wife and my son to the grocery store, to Wegmans. They have a little toy train thing that's up in the ceiling. My son loves it. He loves trains, man.
You let him ride a train on the ceiling? That sounds interesting.
He watches it. We always go to the damn personally human man checkout line.
That's right.
Because I don't want to do a bunch of work for the damn Wegmans company. You want me to check my shit out? Pay me. Give me a 5% discount on my groceries.
Well, but so then maybe the socialism future seems like a real possibility, in the sense that a UBI and a far less. I mean, he mentions in the book the John Maynard Keynes letter to his grandchildren, which we've talked about in the podcast before, which is really incredible. 100 years ago, it was written, very prescient in terms of its predictions about GDP and technological advance. He made the error of not realizing the importance of politics to how things are, because he thought, with these advancements, you're only going to have to work 15 hours a week. You're going to have all this leisure time, all of the necessity that went along with capitalism in the scarcity days. That's not going to be a thing anymore. Not realizing that instead the logic of capital is to just squeeze workers for as much as possible and expect more out of them and not pay them anymore, even if you're getting wealthier and wealthier. But if the class struggle can actually do something about that, okay, suddenly you can have what Marx would call the realm of freedom increasing, and the realm of necessity being something that we spend less time in, right? That maybe there are automation, robots, AI, there is going to be fewer things that we have to do that we used to have to do, and more things that are done that we don't have to be compensated for, right? That's going to be, and this is interesting too, in the communism section, where falling GDP actually doesn't mean a falling standard of living, because your cost of living goes down because people have more free time. They're going to freely choose to care for grandma because they have the time and interest in caring for grandma. So there's not going to be as many people being paid to care for someone else's grandma. There's going to be more people freely caring for their own grandma, right? This is the kind of alienation is the problem of capitalism, where you are not connected to the fruits of your labor, and you don't know whose grandma that is, that you're helping. And then there's the problem of exploitation, which is like the wealth being stolen from you and you being squeezed for all of your energy and effort. And there's ways that I think both of those evils could be addressed, even without the replicator kind of advances, right?
And this, I think, brings up a couple additional points about AI shit. So the first one is the problem of, shall we say, the problem of crime. And how well like these agentic systems will actually work and how available they'll be. If they're universally available and they can be used to simulate highly accurate imitations of...
Do you mean like fraud? Fraud in particular?
Yeah. Yeah. To scam people, to scam your grandma out of her life savings by sure. Like, look, here's Alexi with a totally convincing video FaceTime thing saying, I've been kidnapped by, Elon Musk, and you have to pay everything you have to get out of this. And that, this is the article I referenced by Dan Davies earlier. He says, quote, if agentic AI is available to the masses at low cost, though, there will have to be a lot of guardrails imposed. People keep telling me that various of the current problems of hallucination will soon be solved, and I'm not in a position to gainsay them. But right now, there is not very much actively malicious use. If you think you hate the problem of the pollution of the online space with useless AI slop, wait until you see the space being flooded with things that have been purposefully designed to deceive and misinform. If there isn't some system which works at least as well, and therefore costs at least as much, which is to say a hell of a lot, as the anti-spam protections of the currently existing platforms, then there's just no future for agentic AI. Nobody is going to send the little computer program with their bank details out into a system that's a massive arms race.
Yeah, two things real quick on that. That is so scary, and we haven't talked about this because it really wasn't part of Frase's book, but no. Between MAGA and the total disregard for reality, the total conspiracy theory, QAnon, blatant, Trump this time just blatantly saying things that are easily verifiable falsities. Like when the Supreme Court ruled against him 9-0, just saying in the press conference to everyone that was a 9-0 decision in his favor. Like that, like absolutely crazy, false thing, just totally destroying any respect for truth and reality. And you couple that with the ways that AI is making people, whether it's creating a paper or whether it's a video or image or whatever, destroying our sense of not just reality, but being able to trust what's real and therefore being skeptical of people and messages and communication. And that trust is so important socially, politically, to keep our sanity, but also to collaborate and to live together. That doesn't bode well for the kind of social bonds necessary to dealing with climate change or dealing with any of these complexities. But on the other hand, it's a kind of chicken and the egg thing, because if you take away the incentive for fraud, which is if there's not inequality, if there's no way to aggregate wealth, if wealth and power are nipped in the bud and you can't actually have great wealth or power over someone, and therefore no one is in dire need, then suddenly the motivation for using these technologies in those ways is dealt with at that level, right? And also you've built a kind of trust and community and a resource to deal with the people who do try to use those tools in those ways, right? Because now you have the leisure time we forget isn't just for time with family, which is great, but it's also time for being a true citizen of the country you're in, of the world. Not just, we forget that part of the problem today is people are so beaten down, they don't have the time or energy to do anything else. And part of the socialist vision is when you democratize everything, you now have a true demos, people who are coming together to solve problems and deal with things. And that's a resource we're going to need with these kind of problems that are presenting themselves, I think.
No, I absolutely agree. But that, kind of ties into my second point about AI, which is whether or not there will be, as in the rentism future, an actual ownership of these technologies, because as we've seen, there's OpenAI, which is getting untold tens of billions of dollars in venture capital funding, but is also torching money at an unbelievable rate, like negative 50% profitability.
And to be fair, that's what Bezos did for like a decade or more, right?
He did, but, it's a different kind of model. They're thinking about it like software, where the, capital expenditure is very low and the marginal cost is also very low. But this is a very, very expensive, both in capital and in marginal cost terms. You have to build these massive data centers, and then every query is like 10 times as expensive as a Google search. But I think more importantly, we've seen these open source models come out, like DeepSeek. You can download DeepSeek. It's not fully open source, but you can get the weights and you can tweak it. And there are lots of other different types of models that you can check out that have been made by people. Facebook's Llama model is also, partly open source. And it's not clear to me that there's any kind of moat for these AI things. And so, the idea that you could sort of enclose this and everyone in the world will have to come to Sam Altman, right, on bended knee to be able to get whatever you want, to get your AI agent to plan your kid's birthday party for you, may not
Seems
be true.
Less probable. Yeah.
This could be a sort of an abundant future. And insofar as AI is useful, I think that's still very much up in the air. It's definitely useful in certain contexts. It's not the oracle of all truth by any stretch of the imagination, but there are certain tasks that it is, quite impressive at performing.
We've been shown, early on, we're like, this doesn't think. There's no logic involved. It's just predicting the next word. And then before long, it's like, oh, okay, I actually can reason very well. And all right, so we were wrong about that.
Yeah.
Like some of the assumptions. So a lot of the assumptions were based on like what seemed to be the case in that moment. And we're like, well, this isn't going to change in kind. It might like be a little better in degree. And then it ends up making a leap in kind. It's like, oh, well, that's different. Okay.
Yeah. Right. Again, you've seen that, like it just do. I was just reading an article about how, they've made the most advanced AI mathematics model, and to where sometimes it struggles with like multiplication, but can solve some of the most difficult, like cutting edge mathematics, problems that exist in the field, without any prior exposure to those questions. Shit that like is 10 orders of magnitude above my ability even to describe. And again, in order to verify that that's correct, you have to have an actual mathematician to say, yeah, it fucking got it. But yeah, it is not crypto. It is not NFTs. This is a legitimately impressive technology. And I think, the problem with how a lot of people think about this, they're rightly outraged that these things have been trained without anyone's consent on the entire internet, basically hoovering up all the data collectively
apparently
produced.
It's very likely that anything that has ever been written on a Google Doc has been used for training data for Google.
No doubt. But it's being advertised as something that it isn't, which is a fully conscious, like person that you can just say, hey, ChatGPT, what is the capital of Swaziland? And it will know it. It probably would give you the right answer most times, but it's
but that's
not
because there's consciousness. Yeah,
no,
there's not consciousness.
you can't trust it in that way. You know, you can use it in certain ways if you understand how it works, but it's been marketed and frankly, from what I can tell, accepted by the vast majority of people who use this thing.
People have parasocial relationships with the Kardashians and Tom Brady. So what do you think is going to happen with a robot that's like talking to them? I mean, come on.
Yeah, I've heard that's one of the biggest uses, most profitable uses of AI is people on OnlyFans who are automating their chats with subscribers. Because that's the real value proposition of OnlyFans is to have a pretend girlfriend. You can see titties anywhere you want. There are limitless quantities of them, but you can't have a pretend girlfriend or boyfriend on the internet. And Jesus Christ, that's depressing.
So we haven't even gotten to all the dangerous ways that the technological advances can affect society and also affect our inability to think for ourselves or the ways in which we're going to become more alienated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But as always, it's the technology isn't the problem as much as who controls and owns it and how that then informs the way that it influences our laws, policies, social norms, education, all the things. It's once again is the demos running the show in terms of what the common good requires and what needs to be actually tempered or dealt with in certain ways, or is the demos subordinate to whatever technological and capital advances require for themselves and for their own end. And boy, has that difference never been more stark, I think, in what's going to happen in the future. So more than ever, we need to have a socialist impulse, I think. Because the stakes are higher than ever before, I think.
Yeah. And maybe to, finish off on an optimistic note, as I referenced before, I think the sort of central tendency among Silicon Valley elites like Elon Musk is the exterminism thing. He's worried about overpopulation, but he's going to solve it by having 10 million children of his own. They are just absolutely in love with the idea that they can replace all of their workers with AI slaves. And that's why they're putting so much money into this. However, I don't think that's going to work. I don't think the technology, I'm not remotely an expert in this area, but I don't think the technology is at all equipped to achieve anything like full sentient consciousness where you can just like trust the computer to do what a human could do. I don't think it's there yet, and I don't think it's likely to get there. I think it's going to be very labor assisting.
And it will affect labor markets and industries. And I think that's why even Elon Musk has been in support of a UBI, universal basic income, because he realizes that the changes will at least affect the number of consumers. And without a UBI, there'll be a problem with how the markets function. Right?
Yeah. Well, and sidebar, by the way, as Harvey K would say, I think that the just pell-mell rollout of this stuff may end up, cutting the capitalists off at the knees because the way they've marketed and advertised this is making it so that junior software engineers, they can function without AI tools. And from what I've read, again, AI is most useful for people who already know what they're doing, not for the junior people who haven't had to grapple with everything. And so you're giving these, you're choking off the pipeline of your own talent that will be necessary to run your businesses in the future.
That's true of academia as well. I know. I'm sure you've got an earful from Chelsea. So academics, scholars can use AI fruitfully because they know when AI is full of shit or when it's doing something interesting, and they can have interesting questions posed because embedded in the question is an understanding of the thing you're asking about, and therefore it can be a tool that's useful to somebody who's already expert, as you were suggesting in other areas, right, with math or whatever. But the people that want to rely on it the most don't know anything, and therefore aren't able to discern if the answers are useful, and maybe they could try to memorize something that even is very brilliant, but they won't see the brilliance in it. They won't be doing the thinking. They won't even understand the thing and why it's brilliant because they're not doing the thinking and they didn't have the groundwork laid, right? And so there's a kind of catch-22 here, of course, is that the people that never grew up relying on something like AI are the ones that now can maybe benefit from it in many ways. But if we're forming the next generation of people in terms of our colleges, in terms of our professions, and they're relying on it in a way to do the thinking for them and do the tasks for them, then we're totally hosed.
Yeah, because it's gonna fuck up, and they're not gonna know that it's fucked up.
That's right.
Yeah, we're seeing this all over the place. But the second part of my diverted into pessimism, back to optimism on the rentism question. I don't think that this stuff is going to end up as a monopoly, owned thing. We're already seeing massive innovation in doing local LLMs. Like Intel has just come out with a new, package of video cards that are designed, they just have massive amounts of RAM, and they're expensive, but they're not that expensive, like $10,000.
That'll change too.
Yeah, right. And this is just the first generation of these things. Apple, you buy a fully kitted out Mac Studio. It costs about $10,000. It's got a like 500 gigabytes of RAM that you can use. You can load the whole LLM into that thing. And I think we're gonna see an explosion of people that they're like, I don't want to give all my data to DeepSeek or OpenAI. I'm just going to play with this homebrew stuff. People have been doing this for years, and it's going to become much cheaper and much easier as time passes. And people, like one of those NVIDIA chips, the H100 or whatever it is, like their cutting edge thing, they cost $100,000 a pop. That's what's filling up these data centers. I mean, the profit margins on those things are ridiculous. And you could imagine, especially if you don't have, it doesn't need to be like, you prompt it and it comes in 2 seconds later. All kinds of applications where, you just run it on your home machine and it does good enough, or, your work machine or something like that. And it's only, a few $1,000s of investment that you need. And so it's not controlled by a monopoly of sort of copyright maniacs.
Right. And we need to push in that direction. We need to push towards open source, towards communal and democratic public ownership, if there's ownership in any meaningful sense at all. We need to push against militarization and the carceral approach to social problems. We need to, go with the energy of the markets and technology when they're advancing in a kind of collaborative socialist way, and fight against the exterminist and rentist tendencies. And I think that the battle lines are drawn and we can win. Yeah,
I think it is not impossible. Like things are bleak, but we're probably not looking at a communist future at any time soon. But I don't think anything else is baked in either. And I think that there's a great deal of possibility to organize around, basic egalitarian politics and open access to all this stuff. A future that isn't every time you have to, eat a bowl of cereal, you have to pay Sam Altman $15 that you got from Sam Altman.
Even if we can't control the climate change ecological side directly, and we can't control how technology evolves directly, the other access, right, the egalitarian versus hierarchical, that's directly within the sphere of politics that we can fight for the transformation there. So let's do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. First thing we do, under the administration of glorious leader, Mark Milley, we tax the billionaires out of existence.
Baby.
Amerimaidan, here we come.
Oh, I should just mention that Peter Frase, among his prescient things, he had Doge in there, the Dogecoin. Which incredible. This is in the section on communism, actually, about how even if you have wealth and power being equal, you still have kind of status competition, and how people will invent kind of fake ways to figure out who deserves more status. So that is part of the Elon. However, the Zuckerberg and Musk complexes, they're like sad little insecure narcissistic selves. This is what they're doing with each other, right? They have all the money and power in the world, but they're doing a little status cool game because they're former nerds, right? So they're how much of their actions are actually motivated by the need to get attention and affection, just like Trump, and to win the little status recognition game, maybe.
Yeah. No, when Elon Musk closed the Twitter purchase, he celebrated by saying "fuck Zuck," according to that recent book by Ryan Mack.
So even in their little world, right, there's still hierarchy and competition. That has nothing to do with. There's a wealth and power competition, but this is not about that.
We said it before, but one of the more convincing reasons to tax billionaires out of existence
for their own sake.
Being a billionaire seems fucking horrible. Just drinking a gallon of lead paint a day, you become a miserable, horrible shithead, and you end up pretending like you're the best Path of Exile 2 player in the world, like paying a bunch of Chinese people to play
Ryan,
the game
when we
for you.
say that socialism means no one's free until everyone is free, that includes the rich and powerful, who are maybe, as Plato would show, the most miserable people of all.
Yeah. Tax billionaires into existence. Tax them into being humans again.
Human! That's my America. Make billionaires human again.
Yeah. That's for their own good. So, you got to drink your tough medicine. But that's probably good. Yeah. That's probably a good place to stop. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you in the next episode.